would like to introduce Amanda Schneider to you. I love Amanda. She's the executive director for Amplify Voices. Amanda is not only a leader in this organization, but a graduate of Amplify's first program, Triumph Over Trafficking and Sexual Abuse. She is deeply committed to helping others find the freedom and fulfillment that comes from sharing their lived experiences with empowerment. Today, Amanda will share more about Amplify's impactful work and guide us through some experiential exercises to explore why we silence ourselves and how vulnerability can create powerful connections. Join us live to hear Amanda discuss the transformative power of owning your own story. And I love that. As I was thinking about that, I thought, how many years did I kind of want to run from my story or separate myself from my story? And so this is in some ways kind of revolutionary. And I love that. And to also discover how Amplify's programs help individuals find strength in their voices with insights from Amplify Speaker Circle graduate Trina, who shares, "My story doesn't own me anymore, I own it." And that is a powerful thing. So Amanda is going to guide us through exercises to explore why we silence ourselves and how vulnerability can create powerful connections. And we will talk a little bit more about at the end about a way to connect live and in person later this month. Welcome, Amanda. I am going to turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm going to just start with a question. When you think of the word power, have you ever thought of the power of your voice, of that being powerful? Anybody? Specifically in terms of sharing our stories. It's very powerful, and that's what we're going to talk about today, and the benefits of sharing those stories. So just as a temperature check right now, how many of you feel like you are comfortable and confident in your voice right now? Okay. And then, okay, we could do a temperature check. We could do a not comfortable at all. We could do, and Sean and Donna, there are react buttons if you're unable to come on, or feel free to add in the chat, like maybe a scale of 1 to 10, where you are in terms of just being comfortable and confident in using your voice. It's kind of okay. So 4, I'm getting kind of mid, 6 to 7. Awesome. Great. That's going to be a starting point. So today we're going to explore some different questions and take a look at a few ways that we can own our story and discuss those benefits. So just a quick little introduction to Amplify. Yes, like Michelle said, I am the executive director of Amplify Voices and also a program graduate. I live in Tempe with my husband and 3 boys who are 16, 14, and 12, and 3 rescue dogs who are various forms of snoring behind me right now. I'm a former classroom teacher. I also have a master's in education, and I'm a certified communications coach. So a little bit about Amplify Voices. At Amplify, we empower people to break free from the silence that often comes after trauma or some sort of adversity. And we enable them to share their stories with courage, with conviction, and compassion. We're an advocacy incubator. So we're dedicated to empowering individuals from communities that are misunderstood or silenced, and help them use their voices to create positive change in their communities. So our programs start by creating a safe space for individuals to connect and to share their experiences. And this reduces feelings of isolation and builds a sense of community and understanding. And so it's from that foundation that we provide our participants with simple tools and platforms that empower them to use their voice, discover that confidence and that empowerment so they can become lifelong change makers. We want them to continue using their voice long after they leave our programs. Amplify was founded in 2020 by Deb Shapiro. She is an experienced professional speaking coach, and she was moved to start Amplify after a conversation with a close friend of hers. Sparky is her name, and she had been kidnapped and sex trafficked as a 13-year-old, and she could not talk about it 50 years later. She had been silenced that whole time from shame, feeling isolated in that experience. And we say she was literally the spark that started Amplify. And because of her, I had the opportunity to participate in Amplify's inaugural program, Triumph Over Trafficking and Sexual Abuse. So I began the program with 6 other survivors of trafficking and sexual assault in January of 2021. After that conversation with Sparky, Deb was compelled to bring her programming and what she had done to work specifically with a group of survivors of trafficking to help them find their voices and tell their stories. So over 90 days, I found a new sisterhood with these women. We learned to trust each other, to dig deep into our experiences, and distill the parts of our stories that could tell a powerful message. And I remember standing on the stage after the 90-day program, we graduate and stand on a stage and tell our stories, give our talks. And for the first time in my life, I felt like my voice mattered. And it felt worthy. I felt worthy of the time and the space that I took up. And that was the first time in my life that I had experienced that. And I really felt like my voice mattered and what I had to say could make an impact on somebody else. And so it's still one of the high points of my life, and I have not stopped using my voice since. So by that point, I had fallen in love with Amplify's bigger mission and Deb's passion, and I told her she was stuck with me and I wasn't going anywhere. And in September of 2021, I became the executive director. So since then, it's been the two of us that have been working to expand the outreach for Amplify. So after Triumph Over Trafficking, we showed replays of the talks that we had given on stage, and other women started coming forward saying, I have a story. How do I have my voice heard? And so we created a shorter, truncated version called Speaker Circles. It's a 45-day program done all virtually, where we create that safe space and participants begin to start crafting a talk. And they graduate by delivering their talk within the safe confines of their circle. So we ran 3 pilot circles of those. They were incredibly successful. And that's where one of my favorite quotes came from that Michelle shared. My story doesn't own me anymore. I own it. And that's a powerful thing. And just to have that experience of that transformation is just really, really incredible. So at that point, we were asked by the San Diego Diocese and University of San Diego to run our 90-day program with a group of formerly incarcerated individuals. They wanted to highlight the importance of restorative justice. So in 2022, we completed Restoring Humanity. Then a prominent breast cancer surgeon approached us saying, you know what, there's a silencing on the other side of treatment for women that have gone through breast cancer, and I want to do your program for women who'd been touched by breast cancer. So in 2023, we produced Beyond Breast Cancer, where 15 women shared the lessons that they learned through their journey with cancer and after that. So we've grown organically over the last several years, and that brings us to where we are today. So we have 3 areas of focus that we are working on now. The first one is we are screening our documentary that's called The Journey. This is a film that highlights the stories of 3 of the women that went through Triumph Over Trafficking. And it not only informs what trafficking looks like in our communities, but it also brings hope and inspiration through the resilience and power of these beautiful survivors. We're excited. We're screening at ASU in September for their students and staff, and we're exploring some other opportunities. We're also expanding our speaker circle programming. We're in partnership with Nationwide Insurance. Their training and curriculum department is volunteering their time and talents to create a curriculum for us. And in the next couple of months, we will be training our first group of speaker circle facilitators. So they will be able to offer and expand speaker circle programming for survivors of sexual assault and trafficking, individuals who have been touched by breast cancer, and then also people who have had a mental health experience. And that brings us into launching our next voice, the Voice for Mental Wellness. We recognize that mental health impacts everyone, especially in our increasingly disconnected post-pandemic high-tech world that we live in. Loneliness is now considered an epidemic. 1 in 2 adults report feelings of loneliness. In Arizona, over 1 million people have been diagnosed with a mental health condition. And despite the prevalence of mental health, there's still this stigma and silence that exists. So we wanted to address that head on. So in 2025, we're actually in our fundraising process. We're kicking that off right now. We're going to address mental health directly and really want to break down the labels and bring conversation about that. So that's a little or a lot about Amplify. I am extremely passionate about the power of storytelling. It's changed my life and it has the power, I really believe, to connect our often disconnected world. So thank you for this opportunity today. All right. So I'm going to, as we go through today, ask you to do some reflection, writing some things down, sharing if you feel comfortable. I'm going to share parts of my own stories to give examples of some of the points that I make throughout. And parts of what I share might feel sensitive to you, and you might even disagree with how I approached a situation or made sense of the experiences. And that is okay. Can we agree that we all have different experiences that have happened in our lives and that they have all culminated to lead us to who we are today and how we've gotten here? Um, and so, with that presence of kind of respect for everybody's, experiences and belief, I ask that we enter this conversation and this exploration today because I hope you will be participating with me. Holding amplifies 4 principles in our minds and in our hearts. So, our first principle is no diminishment. We really believe that we can tell our stories and speak in a way that lifts everybody up without tearing anybody else down, and that includes ourselves. We also believe in no ego. When we share something and when we share our experiences, we do so for the sake of connecting with somebody else or with a positive intent. And the big one is we only go as far as we're called to go. Some of us are more comfortable with vulnerability and we are more open to sharing while others aren't. And if somebody is very vulnerable, it doesn't mean that everybody has to be. We really want to be respectful because once something comes out of your mouth, you cannot put it back in. So just be mindful of that. And there's no expectations. You only go as far as you're called to go. And our fourth principle in our programs is this is a team experience. So we do things together, and I do hope you will participate in whatever way you're able to. So we're going to get started by reflecting briefly on your beliefs about sharing, specifically about talking about vulnerable things or hard things with other people. So I want you to kind of just take a moment and think back to when you were growing up. What messages did you receive at home about talking about hard things? Were you aware of any? Maybe you didn't have any messages, but if you did, what were those messages? And considering those, where do you stand today in your beliefs about sharing? Few seconds, and then I'm going to ask for some shares. Love this. As you're jotting things down, we've got growing up, don't think about hard things. Don't talk about family business with other people. What happens at home stays at home. Similar concept there. There was not deep conversation. No. Anything else? And feel free, you can type it in the chat box. Feel free to come off of mute and share your voice. You don't need to listen to only my voice the whole time.
I think just the same, like we didn't have deep conversations. We didn't talk about vulnerable things. There was like, I was literally born into like a lot of grief around, but it wasn't talked about and kind of just shush it under the rug.
Yeah. Shush it under the rug, don't talk about it. And I think, I mean, since I've become a parent, I've been aware, like, even if we don't talk about things, our kids still feel it, right? Like, it's there. You might not understand what it is, but there's something there and there's this disconnect and maybe, yeah.
Totally.
Oh, told to get over it, stop complaining. Yep. We just didn't talk about personal stuff. Just didn't do it. Yeah. Okay, so those are some messages that you had growing up, and we often come into our being in the world and how we are operate with those ingrained in us. That's kind of our gut reaction. Stay in a child's place. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so as we consider our beliefs and sharing, we're going to move next into your comfort level with vulnerability. So, vulnerability is defined as the state of being open to injury. It can be emotional or physical, or appearing as if you are. So, in other words, it could be defined as exposing yourself in some way. So, let's take a scale of 1 to 10, how your comfort level is. What is your comfort level with vulnerability? 1, absolutely no, not okay. 10, I'm good. Vulnerability is like my jam. And then is it the same level for all people, or does it differ depending on the audience? And what factors matter there? So let's kind of dig a little bit into this. Depends on the people I am around. Michelle, with most people, you're at an 8. Awesome. Probably less with family. Take a couple more shares. Okay, a 3 to 4 in general. Around my closest tribe, it's close to a 7, and that's still tough. Yeah, that's great awareness, like being aware of that being vulnerable is a challenge. This is a good one. Unless they've proven themselves to be untrustworthy with vulnerability, then it's a 2 to 3. Yeah, there's a level of earning trust. Somebody needs to have trust is a big factor for that. Wonderful. So my biggest example with learning the power of vulnerability happened after my assault. So I was sexually assaulted 8 years ago. I was at a work conference in San Diego. It was a luxury resort. I was 40 years old, 3 little boys at home, feeling everything was fine. And somebody had slipped a date rape drink or a date rape drug in my drink. And I did not understand what had happened for the first period of time. I came home. My husband was leaving early the next day for a work trip, so he left. And in that moment, I had figured it out and pieced together what had happened. And I can attest to the absolute feeling of isolation. It was just numbing of how alone I felt. And I was trying to be a mom and get my kids off to school and all of these things. And I just had this like paralyzed feeling. And I decided early on I needed to connect with somebody. And so I called a trusted friend and had her come over. And I remember being like sharing for the first time. And it was like terrifying because I had blamed myself. Like victims of trauma and crime, often there's a response of blaming yourself and like, what did I do and why did I do this and all of these pieces. And so there was this big fear of speaking this out loud to another human being because of that judgment and what would she say and would she blame me too. And as soon as I got the words out, she looked at me and shared her own experience of a sexual assault that had happened when she was 18 that she had never told anybody before. And it was just such a powerful connection point. And it was one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is when we can find that courage and be vulnerable with somebody who has earned our trust, we give them permission to see their experiences in us or give them permission to connect with us, because we're a safe space then. We're open for that. And it was in those conversations in the days afterwards, the continuing to share, that led to a lot of healing for me. It led to connection with others. And it was just this really powerful point in my life where vulnerability is it's important and it's necessary and it's hard. And it doesn't always feel great afterwards, but it has been this big force of connection for me through the years, and that's believe hugely in that. So just wanted to share, does anybody else at this point, have you had any experiences where you've had a vulnerable conversation and had a similar response of connection afterwards? And this is if anything comes to mind, take a couple of shares.
So I'm thinking of like several things, but they've all been like so much more recently. And I've noticed this huge difference that's happened in my life since I've been willing to myself be more open with my experiences. I've noticed that it gives a lot of permission for other people to do the same. And obviously, I see this professionally, but also like personally too, whether it's in relationship with my kids or with my husband, to be like, hey, I'm feeling really nervous about this, and I'm not even sure what's happening here. Or this was the experience I had, or I'm feeling shame about this topic. And I have found, and I was the one who put on there, like, it depends on who, right? Like it needs to be someone who's proven that they can be trustworthy with that information. But for the people that I know will receive it with compassion and kindness, it has always been um a really expansive experience. And also, like, I know you say no diminishing, but I like it when it diminishes feelings of being alone, when it diminishes feelings of shame, when it diminishes, some of these other things that come from not speaking it out loud. I had an experience, I'm like talking too much, but that's okay. Um, I had this experience where it wasn't until I was like in my late 30s that I ever spoke aloud for the first time things that I experienced in my childhood, like silence for 30 years, basically, about what I had experienced, or 25 or whatever, however long it was. And as that was like one of the most terrifying things I've ever done, was to speak those things out loud, like actual like panic attack terrifying, because I felt like, it's funny you said, do you feel like your words don't have power? I think in some ways I felt like my words had too much power. Like like if I speak this out loud, what is going to happen, and what could change, and how will people think of me, and will anybody believe what I have to say, and how will this affect my family, and on, right? All of these ramifications. And yet it wasn't until coming through to the other side of that experience that I found a quality of life that would have been like fantasy territory for me before that.
Wow. I was gonna ask, what has it been like after that? And I mean, saying fantasy, like something that you couldn't have even
Yeah,
believed was possible.
I mean, for sure. Not, and I always want to clarify this. This doesn't mean that all the circumstances of my family and everything is just like blissful white picket fence perfect. Like, we have struggles and challenges that are rising up all the time. And yet, even with that, I feel like I'm living a life beyond my wildest dreams because of the connection I feel to the people that matter to me, and the sense of like internal safety that I feel. And I think that that's a direct connection to being honest internally about what I've experienced, and using my voice to have that be also outside of me was like a really big part. Even though the audience was tiny, it didn't matter how big the audience was for me. It was like the other person in the room. But there was something really powerful about actually finding the words and saying them out loud that made a really powerful difference in my healing.
That's great. Thank you, Michelle. Thanks for sharing. And I love that. Yeah, an audience can just be one other person. It's somebody, it's that connection. So I'm going to shift and transition just a little bit into what storytelling can do for others. We've talked about that vulnerable connection. We've talked about giving permission. For me, listening to somebody else's story literally changed my life, and this is where I'm going to be very vulnerable here. Um, and as I share this, it is sharing with how I came into a situation and how I left with the situation. And it has to do with labels. As human beings, we're constantly making, sense of things, we're naming things, we create labels about things, and also in groups of human beings. Um, and so about 13 years ago, I walked into church one day with a label of a group of people, and I left church with a totally different label. And the label that I walked into church with, I was using for a group of individuals. It was illegal aliens. It was my label, my viewpoint, my understanding of you came into this country illegally, you can come in, but it needs to be legal, and just very simple in a box. And in church that day, there was a gentleman who had immigrated here and brought his wife and his two little kids here from a different country. And he shared his story, and he shared about what life was like where they came from and how terrifying it was and what they went through to get here. And all of a sudden, in listening to him, I was like, oh my gosh, here's a parent just like me, a human being who has the same feelings that I have about his kids. And what must that be like? And I was able to put myself in his shoes. And all of a sudden, this person was not a label, it was a human being. And that experience has completely changed my life. And, it doesn't mean that we always agree with things, but it's that access to more compassion when we can listen to somebody else's experience and realize that there's so many complexities in our world. It's not often simple, and there's reasons why, you know, people believe the way they do, take actions the way they do. And the more that we can listen and find those stories and listen to them with curiosity and with an openness for compassion, I think the better we will all be. Because I don't know about you, but I feel like there's a lot of this divisiveness in our world right now, and we have that capacity to connect with others that we don't necessarily always agree with, or different things like that. So that was the beginning piece for the power of storytelling for me, and I've seen it over and over again. When I participated in Triumph Over Trafficking, I entered that program not knowing a lot about sex trafficking. I came from my experience of sexual assault, but I was joining a program with 6 survivors of trafficking. And I thought I knew what it was because of what I saw on the news and what I picked up through my life, and had my understanding of what it was. And it was sitting in these spaces and listening to the stories of these women. It just opened up so much more understanding and changed my perspectives. And that's that power of being able to share our messages. And for me, the biggest one was the next program, working with the formerly incarcerated. We sat in rooms virtually with 6 individuals who had been incarcerated anywhere from 10 to 23 years. And in that, I just remember this experience of, it was so surreal. I was looking at these human beings that I had gotten to know, that I had listened to their stories, and full of trauma, full of adversity. And it wasn't that I was agreeing with their choices, but there was a compassion and an understanding there. And it has opened up my world and made such a difference. And that's why I am so passionate about that storytelling piece. So, sorry, I just got off track there with where I was going there. So the point is, we've got labels for groups of people, and sometimes they're made so we can get information across simply and easily. But just knowing that they can sometimes dehumanize individuals and overly simplify complex situations. So again, that storytelling has that power to break down those labels. So for me, part of owning my story has been a practice of becoming aware of my beliefs and my actions and why I do them and exploring where they came from. Do they serve me still? If they do, yep, moving on. If they don't serve me anymore, maybe I've got a shifted perspective, different things like that. So it's just been a really powerful practice. So before we move on to the final part, I just want to take a moment and see, has anyone else encountered an experience of like hearing somebody else's story? We talked about sharing our own story. Have you heard somebody else's story where your perspective may have shifted or changed as a result? Okay. Yeah. And if nothing comes to mind, that's fine as well. But just kind of ponder that. Like we've got internal, like what is the power of sharing our own story, but then also how has it been received when we've heard somebody else's story. So I want to end with asking, what is your story? We all have all of these different experiences that we've encountered. Um, and there you probably have many, many stories, but let's just play around with this. What is important for you to share with the world? Like if you had to distill some lesson that you've learned through life, and we've all gone through hard things. We've all gone through adversity. Like many of us have gone through at least one traumatic experience. And in coming through that, we learn certain lessons in life. So I want to take just jotting down, maybe take a little bit of time for reflecting. What would that lesson be if you were going to share something with the world?
Actually had something come up from the last question you asked. Is that okay to still
Yes,
answer?
absolutely.
It's a little bit different than you asked, but it reminded me of before my parents passed away, my dad was having a conversation with him. And at the time, my mom had dementia. She'd had dementia for like 10 years. And I had been so in my experience as a child losing her mom in that dementia, that in that moment, he showed me like what he was going through losing his partner. And in that moment, I realized that I had neglected to look at what he was going through because I was so caught up in my own experience. And it just taught me, like, just to make sure that I'm not so zeroed in on one angle of the story, because he was having a whole different experience and he was being a strong father for us, but he was going through his own pain.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carla, for sharing that. That's also an important, yeah, it brings you out of, I mean, we get so locked into dealing with our perspective, we forget that others are experiencing it in a different way. Thank you. So that is also a message there, an awareness that, it's important to look at others. So that could be a lesson that you learned in terms of, taking a moment to step back and look at what other perspectives could be. Michelle shared the unbelievable resilience of us as humans to recover from unsurvivable things. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else come to mind? And this is like just a little dip into we go in deep when we go through our speaker circle programs and different things like that. We have a process that we go through, but it's just to kind of get you thinking, like if you had a message to share, what would it be? And are you sharing it? And if not, why not? What holds you back? So,
It's interesting. I think that I didn't realize this, Amanda, but I feel like so much of what you share in the world is there's strands of what I'm here to share too. Like, and I think it comes from having silenced myself for so long as a child and not being taught to listen inside. And so the work I do in the world is to help people get quiet and take their focus off the external to come inside, And, but that comes so much from not feeling like I had a voice for so long and wanting to share that with others too.
It's beautiful. So yeah, and I think you touch, there's so many different ways in which we can use our voice. You know, at Amplify, it's about a spoken word. Um, you coach and help people learn how to discover their voice through journaling and different, you know, there's different modalities in which we can use our voice. We use our voice through art, through music. You know, it's this expressing who we are and our experiences. Thank you for highlighting that. All right, well, I will make the invitation to continue pondering this and just take some time with curiosity around, you know, your vulnerability. And next time you enter or experience a situation that does feel a little vulnerable, just kind of get curious and say, do I have the trust? What would happen if I did share in this moment and see what happens? So thank you for the participation and time.